Now let's talk about the BBC and the apparently never-ending question of bias within the British Broadcasting Corporation. I'm joined now by Rod Liddle, the much-loved, the great Spectator columnist, and we're going to be talking about, he's just stopped abusing us, I should say, about the quality of our set here at SpectatorTV. Having worked at the BBC, Rod, you're used to higher standards of broadcasting. But in your column this week, you talk about a possible new direction for the BBC based on the fact that Newsnight seems to have dropped its bias, which you describe brilliantly as a kind of broadcasted Hampstead Garden suburbs slip page of The Guardian. That was what it was in its previous incarnation. It has seemed to have changed direction, and you're saying it's better as a result.
I think it's much better. Instead of having four women debating and being very miserable with each other, especially about right-wing people and the Tories, there's now a kind of breadth to the interviews. You occasionally indeed see a man on them. I think, Mark Urban particularly is very, very even-handed. I've heard a number of interviews where the interviewee has been quizzed from both left and right, which is kind of the way it's meant to be. It's become sharper in its coverage of politics. It's more intelligent rather than a kind of scream fest of outrage and abuse. And I would put that down to a change of editor and a change of presenters, which I think will come as no surprise to your viewers, which is that Esme Wren, who was the editor, has left, and so has the presenter Emily Maitlis, and so has Lewis Noel, or whatever he's called. They've all gone, and so the programme has become immeasurably better. I mean, they need to deal with their production team, which when I met them seemed to be a convocation of perpetually triggered adolescents. With the kind of collective IQ of a small tank of plankton. But I suspect it's got better than that. The point being, the point I was making, I guess the BBC, if it was looking at a news and current affairs programme, needs to find an audience for it. And it might well think that a kind of left liberal inclined programme might be an audience winner. And it should be, my honest belief is that it should be allowed to do that if that's what it wants to do, but not at the same time make the pretense that it's neutral. But the whole point of the Newsnight business is that back in 2010 it had an audience of close on 1 million, 900,000, and Esme and Emily managed to shred that down to nearly 200,000. Across 10 years. I mean, that is astonishing. It is an astonishing degradation of what was the BB's flagship current affairs programme. And we all remember the good old days of Newsnight. My hope is that they might now be coming back. But it's remarkable that it was allowed to go on for so long without someone saying, aren't we just alienating our audience with this kind of shriek fest? To which, Esme Wren and Emily Maitlis would reply, but look at what our Twitter followers are saying, which is what the left always does. The left thinks that Twitter is the world. And undoubtedly they were kind of cocooned in a sort of bubble, both within New Broadcasting House, but also in a bubble of that kind of, I suppose, there's about 200,000 of them, i.e. the people who watch Newsnight, who still watch Newsnight, who are perpetually on Twitter, perpetually outraged by anybody who ever mentions the word Tory, and are relentlessly active. I mean, the studies of Twitter have shown that those people do exist. So it got it terribly wrong, and you might ask yourself, why didn't they stop it before? But they didn't. The BBC can sometimes be very, very defensive.
Well, something odd happened, I think, during the Corbyn years, which was that people on Twitter and that diminishing section of the public that watched Newsnight convinced themselves that the BBC was becoming dangerously right-wing. and this is something you touched on in your column, that Emily Maitlis said recently that it seems to have been hijacked by a right-wing agenda. I mean, to any sane person, I think that's just nonsense, isn't it?
Well, it's not just nonsense, it's hilarious, but credit to Emily for unleashing just about the only conservative in the BBC, which is Robin Gibb, who's on the BBC board. I know about Newsnight. You know, I've been on it before. I've done programs for little features for Newsnight. I can tell you that there was only one person in the entire Newsnight staff who voted for Brexit. You know, I mean, that is the level of bias, and I would suggest it's probably not much different at the Today programme, World at One, and so on. It is incalculably liberal lefty. I mean, to an incalculable degree. I don't think it's hard left wing. These are affluent middle class people who want to keep their incomes. When questions of taxation come up, they often become somewhat less left-wing than hitherto. But it's left-wing on particularly culture war stuff, on immigration, on most foreign affairs, but particularly Israel. And it's been like that for decades, and it was pretty much like that when I was there. But it became unapologetically, stridently and brazenly like that at Newsnight for a period of about 10 to 12 years. And you saw what happened as a result. The audience left in absolute droves.
Do you think it might be just a question of journalistic intelligence rather than bias? In that the BBC's always had quite a strong left-wing bias. As you yourself said, when you were there was a strong left-wing bias.
No, I don't think it, no, hang on. I don't think it always has.
Oh, you don't think it always has?
No, I think the left-wing bias kind of grew up during the late 80s, early 90s, along with it's the Gramsci march through the institutions and a change in our establishment.
Yes.
It became a liberal elite rather than a right-wing elite. I think back in the 70s, you could probably say that the BBC was kind of a voice of small c conservatism in many ways. And certainly when you look at light entertainment within the BBC back in the 70s, all the big stars, Bruce Forsyth, Jimmy Tarbuck, Morecambe and Wise, the two Ronnies, all those kinds of people, Cilla Black, Lulu, Cliff Richard, all of them Tories. You know, all of them Tories. Whereas today, if you look at the light entertainment, if it's possible by what stretch of the imagination to call Joe Lycett entertainment, you'll find that they are all tending to the left when they're not actually claiming to be female, if they're male.
What did you think of Joe Lycett's much talked about performance on Sunday on Laura Kussenberg's new show?
Well, I thought it was exactly what you would expect from Joe Lycett in being A, not funny, and B, left-wing. I mean, you know, and that seems to be, I think there must be an interview room, a bit like the room you're sitting in now, Freddie, at the BBC, where potential comedians for the BBC are interviewed, and they say to them, we just need to check a couple of things first. Firstly, are you funny? No, not at all. Are you someone who hates the Conservative Party? Yeah, I really hate them. Okay, you're in. Because it is remarkable the number of comedians and performers who just aren't funny. And I don't think this is just me. They just aren't funny, but they do have the right views, you know. And you think of all the great comedians who don't get on. People like Paul Chowdhury, for example, who's a really, really good comedian and is almost never on the BBC, despite his videos and DVDs selling out, you know, selling masses across the country, far more than Joe Lycett ever sells. Paul Chowdhury sold out he sold out something massive, Wembley, I think. You know, I mean, he's a really big figure, and he's not a Jim Davidson, who also has a case to him, or a Roy Chubby Brown. He's a serious and very funny comedian from our ethnic minorities. But because he can't be pigeonholed by his views, the BBC can't stand it.
Do you think, I mean, you talk about a question of sport in your column. Is it just the fact that light entertainment now has to be a bit more political because the culture wars have taken over?
Yeah, well, I think the BBC presumably thinks that. I think the rest of the country thinks it doesn't. The question of sport thing is, it is inconceivable what they did. I mean, it is just so fantastically stupid. But though it does go along with their defenestration of Andrew Neil and indeed Jeremy Clarkson in the end, really, really popular people who may have views with which the rest of us here at New Broadcasting House don't share. But what they did, they got rid of Sue Barker, and with Sue Barker, who was an incredibly popular presenter, incredibly popular, 24 years there, they got rid of Phil Tufnell and Matt Dawson, who were the team captains. And they had a chemistry. I mean, Question of Sport isn't my favourite programme. The only sport I really like is football. And there was precious little of it on that programme. But they undoubtedly had a chemistry, and they were incredibly popular. They got 5 million viewers, nearly 5 million viewers. They get rid of Sue Barker. They lie to the press and say that Sue Barker wanted to stand down, which Sue Barker then immediately corrected and said, I didn't want to. So they lie about getting rid of Sue Barker. They get rid of Matt Dawson and Phil Tufnell and bring in Paddy McGuinness. And I need to look this up. Ugo Monye, Ugo, come on. Ugo Monye and Sam Quek. And so they get Sam Quek and Ugo Monye in. 800,000. That's how many people watch it now. Now, in any other institution or corporation, someone who made that decision and saw that result would be sacked. They would be sacked. I mean, it is a fantastically catastrophic decision to have made. And it also brought odium on the BBC with Sue Barker saying that she felt very hurt and insulted. So it was a massive own goal, rather like the last night of the Proms was an own goal. But has anyone bitten the bullet for it? Nobody at all.
What you're not getting, Rod, is that it's about the kids.
Yes, it's about the kids. They're perpetually in search of the 18 to 30 age group. But the 18 to 30 age group find them as irrelevant and pointless as the rest of us are beginning to find them. You will not bring in 18 to 30-year-olds with Paddy McGuinness and Ugo Monye and Sam. That isn't going to do it. And that is not really what their job is. That has never been their job. Their job is to provide information, entertainment. And that is the point of their existence. They ought to be looking at the people who actually pay the license fee and asking, what do you guys want? Instead of taking this approach, which seems to be drawn from Hugh Green, the previous Director General, which is, we're going to rub their noses in it. We don't care if they hate it. We're here to make them better people. That seems to be the point of view of all the adolescents working for the BBC. With the exception of those, perhaps now in current affairs, there is a bit of a change afoot, which is incredibly welcome.
Well, Rod, we'll stop there, but thank you very much. As you know, the SpecTV audience skews very highly towards the 18 to 30 demographic.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?